Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I rise to contribute to this debate on what is an important motion to establish an inquiry into seismic testing. And I'd just like to associate firstly myself with the comments made by my colleague Senator Whish-Wilson, who's outlined all of the very, very good reasons why a Senate inquiry into seismic testing is needed, and why even the impact of suggesting that the Senate is to inquire into this issue has already helped push along some response from industry and the agency and government departments involved in these issues. But why, Madam Acting Deputy President, am I particularly influenced and passionate about this issue today? That is because, as a senator for South Australia, we now know, as of last Friday, that the government agency, NOPSEMA, is in the first half of next month, so in 3 weeks' time, going to be handing down a decision as to whether the Norwegian company, PGS, can undertake seismic testing in the Great Australian Bight in March next year. That's why this inquiry is urgent. We heard from the Senator Pratt, representing the Labor opposition, a lot of weasel words as to why Labor were not prepared to support this inquiry. They said because none of it was urgent. It could be done next year. None of this is important. Well, I can tell you, it may not seem urgent to a senator from Western Australia, but it is important to those of us in South Australia who are absolutely horrified that during March the Norwegian company PGS want to send blasts through the waters not far from Kangaroo Island, not far from Port Lincoln, which we know last time this occurred in the Great Australian Bight, we saw dead whales wash up on the coast in Ardrossan, right onto the beach. 7 sperm whales dead in South Australia on the beach last time seismic testing occurred. We know, of course, that the fishing industry in South Australia is very concerned about this testing happening as well. They're concerned, one, because of the impact that this has had last time, dead whales, a decline in scallops, a decline in rock lobster, a decline in other types of plankton. But they're also very, very concerned, as is the majority of the South Australian voting public, that we know seismic testing is the first step to drilling in the Great Australian Bight. And the application currently before the government's agency for approval to do this type of loud, dangerous testing and blasting in the water, affecting the dolphins, affecting the whales, affecting the marine life, is only 90 kilometres from Kangaroo Island or 80 kilometres from Port Lincoln, right in the heart of South Australia's tourism jewel. And we're worried. We're absolutely worried that if this testing is to go ahead, it is the first step to drilling in these areas as well. We've already got an application for drilling in the Great Australian Bight from the Norwegian company Equinor, and these tests are to set the path for new applications for drilling as well. And we don't want it in the Great Australian Bight, and we don't want it just off the coast of Kangaroo Island. So some people might suggest, as we heard the minister in this place, saying that the Greens are just scaremongering. Well, I tell you what, most South Australians are scared and terrified of what will happen if we allow drilling in our precious Bight. And we've got every right to be scared. We've got every right to be terrified, because there is a report today from the company, from Equinor, their own modelling, leaked today into the public. Of course, they never wanted it to be seen by the voters in South Australia, by the communities. But this report shows if there was a spill in the Great Australian Bight, our entire coastline would be devastated. And not just in South Australia. This report from Equinor themselves shows that oil would drift beyond the South Australian coastline, all the way up to Bondi Beach in Sydney and all the way up to Port Macquarie. Every Australian who loves our coastline, who believes in our beautiful beaches, who spends time fishing, swimming, whose industries, whose jobs, whose businesses rely on a healthy coast, should be terrified that this government, backed up by the opposition, is willing to tick off on an operation that is going to put this at risk. And this isn't just some kind of green scaremongering. This is the company's own document, internal document that has been leaked. And of course, they didn't want it getting out to the public. They don't want people to know how dangerous drilling for oil would be in the Great Australian Bight if there was a spill. And they say, oh, we don't want there to be a spill. It's just that if there was, this is what would happen. It's not a risk worth taking, Madam Acting Deputy President. What these documents show is that even in the oil company's own full-scale oil spill maps, that there is no way they would be able to contain the oil and the sludge and the muck from ruining our coastline, ruining our beaches and devastating our fishing and tourism industries. Now, I love South Australia's beautiful beaches, but I also grew up on the coast in Victoria. When I was a kid, I used to go swimming down at Cape Conran. That whole area will be devastated. And the further up the coast you go, the south coast of New South Wales, Bondi Beach in Sydney, Port Macquarie, Southwest Rocks, devastated, covered in oil and sludge and muck. It wouldn't just cost billions and billions of dollars and thousands of hours of people power to clean up. Some places would never recover. And in South Australia, where our coastline is so pristine, there is no way it would ever recover. There's a reason that these big multinational foreign companies don't want to have to pay for the insurance of our tourism and fishing industries if they undertake this drilling, because they know that the payouts would be so huge that it just makes the whole project unviable. South Australians are absolutely terrified that our coastline, our tourism industry, our precious Kangaroo Island, right now is being hung out to dry. This inquiry is the first step to trying to put a spotlight on what is going on. Because if the seismic testing happens, there'll be even more companies drilling for oil and gas, not just Equinor, and we already know how devastating one oil spill would be. Imagine if there were more wells popped around the Great Australian Bight. This is very, very deep seabeds, incredibly deep, rough seas. All of the experts say how difficult it would be to ensure that this would be done safely and without accident. And all we need to do is look at what happened in the Gulf of Mexico, where it was much shallower, much calmer waters, much more experience, and yet BP's oil spill still hasn't been cleaned up from over a decade ago. The fishing and tourism industries in that area have been absolutely decimated. And that's what will happen in South Australia if we don't put a stop to this once and for all. It is extremely disappointing to see the Labor Party and the Liberal Party today voting down a mere inquiry into seismic testing. What are you afraid of? What are you afraid this inquiry might uncover? What are you afraid that the Australian people will find out? I heard Senator Canavan, the minister, talking about this issue and saying that, people in South Australia don't care about this. Well, he is dead wrong. And Labor and Liberal senators from South Australia in this place know he's dead wrong. There's a reason they're not in here today defending the gutless positions of their parties. We haven't heard one representative from the South Australian Liberal Party or the South Australian Labor Party today coming in here to defend this gutless position of their parties, because they know they will be turfed out if the South Australian community gets wind of just how dismissive their parties are being to this issue in South Australia and to our coastline, our beaches and our industries. It's not just their parties being gutless on this issue. They should be in here standing up for their state, and they're not. They're not standing up for our beautiful beaches. They're not in here defending our environment, and they're not in here defending our tourism and our fishing industries. Instead, we've got members of their party accusing those of us who are trying to stop this horrendous activity from happening of being scaremongers. The company's own private internal documents show it would be a wipeout if there was an accident. And even if we just allowed that seismic testing to occur as the first step to more oil or gas wells being drilled closer to Kangaroo Island, closer to Port Lincoln, we know last time this happened, dead whales washed up on the beaches in South Australia. That's what happened in December 2014. I don't want to see this happen this summer. I don't want to see any more dead whales washed up on South Australian beaches this summer, because this government and the Labor Party are too gutless to stand up to big oil and big gas in this country. Stop the weasel words and get out of the pockets of the oil and gas industry and do something for the voters and the community in South Australia. That's what I'm here doing. That's what the Greens are doing. We will stare down the interests of these big oil and gas companies, and we'll stand up for our marine life and our environment.